Hello everyone and welcome to the November subscription tasting video where I'm about to taste the coffees that we're sending out for the November subscription. We do send out our subscription coffee every first Wednesday of the month, and we do send worldwide. So that means if you're in the US, for instance, you can subscribe to our coffee. We send with DHL, so it takes a few days for you to get it. You can get tracking and everything. You can also pause and change and upgrade or downgrade your subscription at any time. And you can also stop it anytime you want. So if you want to learn more about the subscription, go to our website. But on to the tasting. This month, it's kind of autumn, almost winter in Norway. So I've selected some very cozy, nice coffees to drink. And maybe some of the best coffees we have bought this year. Not necessarily the highest scoring ones, but I would say at least the farmer that we're getting these coffees from has improved the farm a lot in the recent years. And I think especially the last 2 years, the quality has been exceptional. You might guess it, it's the Los Pirineos farm in El Salvador, and Diego Baraona, my good friend, who is producing these coffees. And we have selected 4 different ones from the same farm. So that means you can taste the difference between cultivars and maybe some process as well. I've recorded a couple of podcasts with Diego, so if you want to learn a little bit more about the farm and how he's working, what it was like to take over the farm after his father died, you should check that out on our podcast website. We do have podcasts published on Apple and all Spotify and all these kind of places, so just pick your favorite place and search for Chim and Elbow Coffee Podcast, and then you can listen to Diego talk a little bit about the farm and all the improvements that he has done. Cool. Let's start with the tasting. I'm a little bit impatient because these coffees are really good. I've set it up as a cupping today, and if you want to learn how to do that, we have a tutorial on our YouTube channel. It's pretty easy. You just have, in these cups I have 11 grams of coffee and 180 grams of water. And you pour the water on, you wait a few minutes, you stir, remove the crust, and then you are ready to taste. If you want to do this with more than one person, which I highly recommend, you need more than one coffee and do it with more than one person, then it's more interactive, and you also learn from what other people's perception is of the flavor. So it becomes a little bit easier to describe flavor when you do it like this. And you don't need all 4 coffees to do this. You can also put on any other coffee on the table. That will give you a good contrast, I think, with the coffees we're sending out. When you're doing it with more people, I like to taste from a cup instead of straight from the bowl into the mouth with a spoon, like we normally do professionally. But it's a little bit more hygienic to do it from the cup. And also, you don't have to wait as long because the liquid cools down a little bit faster when you put it into the cup. So that's a pretty good way of cupping, I think. Let's taste the first coffee. Oh, I missed this coffee. So I'm going to have a little bit more. Los Pirineos, I started buying from Los Pirineos in 2009 or 10, I don't remember. Maybe it was 2010 through the Cup of Excellence. And then I was very quickly contacted by Gilberto, who owned the farm back then. And he said, oh, you should come and visit. So I went the following year, visited the farm, and have been buying direct from them ever since. And the first coffee I bought there was the Bourbon Elite, they call it, because it's the old Bourbon trees from the farm. And some of those Bourbon trees were used in developing new varieties like Tequisik, because it's the kind of original Bourbon in El Salvador that came from generations ago. This is grown on the top of the farm, and the farm is actually a volcano, so this is kind of on the top of the farm. Altitude is around 13 to 1400 meters above sea level. And because the area is a little bit further east than Santa Ana, the area is quite dry and hot. So these coffees are very different to the ones you get from the Santa Ana region. They tend to be more sweet, have more of this kind of chocolatey profile, and very kind of dense mouthfeel. And this Bourbon is no exception to that. It's a very, very typical, I would say, coffee. It tastes like coffee. Tastes like dark chocolate, a little bit of nuts, like roasted nuts. And it has like a really sticky sweetness. Kind of reminds me of molasses, if you've ever tasted that. And a very syrupy mouthfeel. So Bourbon Elite, The difference maybe this year from previous years is that Diego has started to fully wash the coffees again. For many years, these coffees have been semi-washed, which means they use a mechanical mucilage remover. So after they depulp the cherries, they remove the mucilage with a kind of mechanical centrifuge. And then they put the coffee to drying on raised beds on the shades with still a little bit of mucilage on. So in the past, you might have gotten a little bit more roughness to the coffee, sometimes a little bit ferment flavor. This year, Diego is actually fermenting the coffee in the tank before he removes the mucilage mechanically. And that means the coffees are a little bit more interesting and cleaner, I think. He also dries them on the shade. And that means they are fresh for a long time. So this Bourbon for me is kind of the staple coffee on the farm. And actually one of my favorite coffees from this farm, just because it's so uncomplicated and so sweet and rich. So we buy quite a lot of this coffee, and I love using this in our espresso drinks, especially if you add milk. It just becomes like a little glass of chocolate milk, which is fantastic. Cool, so everyone who subscribes to 1 bag or more will get a bag of this, the Bourbon Elite from Los Pirineos. Now the second coffee is a very, very different coffee. It's the Pacamara cultivar. And Pacamara has been, or Los Pirineos has been used in order to develop the Pacamara cultivar. Pacamara is a crossing between Maragogipe, which is a huge plant, I think discovered in Brazil. Huge leaves, huge beans, everything is huge. And then it's crossed with the Pacas, hence the word Pacamara. It was released a little bit early. That means when you do these kind of cross-pollinations, you need to kind of stabilize the outcome. So you cross-pollinate, you plant the seeds, you get some outcome, you select the best trees, you take the seeds from those, you plant again, you select the outcome, and so go do that for like 5 generations. And that's when they normally say the variety is stable. I think the Pacamara was released maybe a little bit early. So when you plant the seeds from certain Pacamaras, you get very different outcomes. And that's just because there are more or less genetics from the mom or the dad. This Pacamara, however, has been certified, so Diego is allowed to sell seeds. And it's, for me at least, one of the better Pacamaras that I have tasted. It's very, very fruity and yeah, very, very sweet as well from this farm. And actually, it does better on the slightly lower altitudes than the higher altitudes. So that's quite interesting. So the Pacamaras are normally planted below 1,300 meters and downwards on the farm. Let's taste it. Wow, fruity indeed. Now this is actually a honey processed Pacamara, and that means the cherries are depulped, and then they don't remove any mucilage, but they put it out to drying. And this is dried on the shade. So they call it black honey because the color of the honey or the mucilage on the cherries kind of gets a little blackish, and that's to do with how often they stir and stuff. So it actually does ferment a little bit during drying, and you can taste that in the cup a little bit. You have this kind of fermented stone fruit flavor, but not in a very dominant way, so it's not like a natural or anything, but it gives a little bit more of that kind of very soft, sweet, overripe mango kind of flavor. There's still nice structure to the acidity. It's not like flabby and all over the place. So for me at least, I kind of enjoy this kind of type of coffees, even though you do get a little bit of that ferment flavor. So I get a little bit tropical fruits, definitely some stone fruit, and maybe a little bit of that kind of cacao nib flavor in the finish. You know, cacao is also fermented like coffee, so a lot of times you get this kind of fruity cacao that reminds me of ferment, and it has a little bit of that in the finish, but there's nothing near these kind of overpowering anaerobic fashion coffees that you get a lot these days. Super sweet, lingering finish. Yeah, very, very nice. So Pacamara from Diego, I think he has done a fantastic job with these coffees this year. They seem to be more concentrated and kind of more textured in a way than it has been in the past. Sometimes in the past, especially the Bourbon, has maybe tended to be a little bit more kind of nutty. whereas this year it's more of that kind of really sweet dark chocolate flavor, which I really like. Okay, then you're noticing that there's 2 cups at the end here. We normally send out just 3 coffees, but Diego is experimenting with a lot of new varieties on his farm, and that means we can buy it, but there's not a lot of volume of each one. So we have selected 2 different ones that are called Bourbons. So a pink Bourbon, which genetically is actually an Ethiopian landrace that has been discovered by some people who test DNA in coffee. But it's called pink Bourbon for some reason. But that's more towards an Ethiopian landrace cultivar. And then at the end here, there's an orange Bourbon, which is actually a Bourbon, but it has orange cherries when you harvest. So instead of the cherries being yellow or red, it's orange. Crazy. The pink Bourbon has kind of pinkish color on the cherries when it's ripe. Let's taste it. Wow, yeah, the pink Bourbon is it's like a completely different coffee to the first 2 ones. Much more acidity, although in this kind of area you don't get a super high acidity because of the altitude, I think. But it definitely has more acidity, a lighter body. More of that kind of floral and pink flavor, how can you say? Apples, maybe? Yeah, apples. Good apple, Norwegian apples. Much more delicate, a little bit tea-like in the mouthfeel, floral, and yeah, I would say it tastes a little bit like apples. This kind of sweet and floral and apple with high acidity. Super nice. That's the pink Bourbon. Let's taste the orange Bourbon. Also a bit higher acidity than the normal red Bourbon Elite, but a little bit more of that kind of sweet, ripe fruit instead of this crisp kind of appley fruit. I would say it also has a little bit of that stone fruit flavor, but a little bit more subtle than the honey processed Pacamara. Both of these are washed, so that means they are fermented and mucilage is removed before it's dried. Yeah, very sweet, maybe kind of in between, so these would be more the heavy-bodied coffees. The pink Bourbon a little bit lighter, and then the orange Bourbon maybe in between. So I guess medium-bodied. Texture is a little bit more elegant, I would say. And it has very subtle fruit flavors with not as much of that kind of sticky, chocolatey kind of finish as the Bourbon Elite. So we're gonna mix these up because we don't have enough to send out to everyone. So some of you who subscribe to 3 bags or more will get either the pink Bourbon or the orange Bourbon. And hopefully you will be happy with both of them. They are really, really tasty, I think. So yeah, and I think maybe for espresso you might get the orange Bourbon because I just assume that it will be easier to brew as espresso for some reason. Maybe I'll change my mind, I'll see. Okay, I'd like to finish up with a little bit of contrast flavor. So I always use the red Bourbon or the Bourbon Elite as the kind of baseline coffee because it's quite kind of low in acidity, very chocolatey flavor. It doesn't have a lot of that kind of fruity, high acidity flavors that the other ones have. So I can go back to that and just control what I'm actually tasting. It makes it a little bit easier to do kind of like a contrasting tasting, much easier to describe the flavor. Yeah, there you have it, chocolate and nuts for sure. Pink Bourbon for sure, much lighter body. Appley flavors for sure, floral. Red Bourbon, very textured, very chocolatey. Let's taste the orange Bourbon. That was interesting. Coming from the red Bourbon to the orange Bourbon made it taste a lot different than coming from the pink Bourbon to the orange Bourbon. So from the red Bourbon, which is more chocolatey, going to the orange Bourbon. Much more of that kind of soft stone fruit flavor. Still medium bodied, I would say, compared to the Bourbon. A little bit higher acidity than the Bourbon, and very kind of a ripe peach or something like that, or like when you bake peach in the oven, you get this kind of very sweet and soft stone fruit flavor. Super nice. And let's taste the honey processed Pacamara. That's for sure a honey processed coffee. Thick mouthfeel, very kind of stone fruity, fermenty, but not overpowering, I think. But it has for sure this kind of fermenty acidity that makes it a little bit more kind of maybe complex acidity. That reminds me of, you know, a very mild kombucha or something like that, or a very nice white wine, for instance. Cool, so those are the coffees we're sending out in November. Shout out to Diego, who's producing these coffees. You should check out the podcast, as I said. We have also done a little bit of filming on our YouTube channel many years ago with his father, Gilberto. So if you want to see some footage of that, you're more than welcome to. I'm planning on going there to film in March. So that means we will get some more updated stuff from the farm, because there's a lot of stuff happening on the farm. Diego is experimenting with organic practices. He's experimenting with new varieties and so on. So there's so much to show from the farm. And I think at least in the last 2 to 3 years, the coffees have become a lot better. And I think that's because of all the work they have been doing on the actual farm. And they kind of shifted a little bit away from focusing on only processing, like Gilberto used to love doing that. And now they're focusing more on actually making the trees healthier, planting more shade, and making the coffee better from the beginning. That's pretty cool, I think. Cool, until next time, you should check out our website to see if you want to subscribe or not, if you're not subscribing. And let me know in the comments below which one of these were your favorites. If you're subscribed to all of them, that's fantastic, but it would be nice to get some feedback on the coffees in the comments below. Till next time, have a good day.